Hey everyone, ready to dive into a whole new world today. We're talking Indian trucking.
Ooh, exciting.
It is. Specifically, we're looking at Zinka Logistics Solutions Limited and their IPO.
Okay.
So we've got some really interesting stuff to go through from their draft IPO prospectus, a report from Red Seer, and some of their financial filings. We're going to try to break it all down, see
Uh-huh.
how they fit into the bigger picture of trucking in India,
Hmm.
and of course, what it all means for investors, you. So what stands out to you right away about Zinka?
I think what's really interesting is that, they're not just some tech company coming in and trying to totally disrupt a traditional industry.
Right.
They've got this really clever approach, kind of a phygital approach.
Phygital.
Yeah. Physical and digital. And they're really catering to the specific needs of these truck operators in India.
Interesting.
Like their reach is massive.
Oh,
86.5% of India's districts.
wow.
And they're in 80% of the toll plaza network.
Huge. So it's not just about being everywhere though,
That's
right?
right.
They have this Black Buck app.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's how truck operators are managing their entire business, like everything.
Pretty much.
It said that the average user spends almost 40 minutes a day on the app.
I know.
That's more than some people spend on social media.
It's amazing.
What do you make of that?
I mean, to me, that level of engagement, it's a really strong signal.
Yeah.
It says that Zinc has really tapped into something, you know,
Mhm.
providing a service that truck operators really find valuable.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And you have to think about it in the context of India's logistics sector. It's booming.
It is.
The trucking market is projected to grow like 8–9% every year.
Yeah, we saw that.
So a company with a user base that's this engaged, they're in a fantastic position.
That's true. But Indian trucking, it's not exactly known for being tech savvy, is it?
You're right, yeah.
I mean, our sources said that things like vehicle tracking are way behind developed countries.
Yeah.
So is Zinka trying to kind of jump ahead of those trends?
I think they are. And that's a huge part of their potential
Okay.
because they're not just offering basic GPS tracking.
Yeah.
They've got a whole suite of telematics features
Like what?
like driver behavior monitoring, theft protection, even geofence alerts.
Wow.
And this is so crucial for truck owners, especially the ones with multiple vehicles, because it gives them control and efficiency they've never had before.
So they're bringing really modern tech to a market that's ready for it.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're aiming to disrupt. But how do they actually make money? What's the business model?
Okay, so their business model has four main parts.
Okay.
Let's start with payments. Think of them as a digital payments hub for truck operators, handling, everything from tolling to fueling.
Okay, so all the transactions.
Yeah. And our Red Seer report actually said that Zinka is the largest payment platform for truck operators in India.
Wow. Being the biggest in any market is impressive, but in a market as big as Indian trucking, that's saying something. Does that give them any, unique advantages?
Oh, absolutely. Having that much market share means they have a ton of data on financial flows within the industry,
I see.
which they can then use to refine their offerings and develop new ones. It's powerful.
It is. But they're not stopping there, are they?
No, they're not. They also offer vehicle financing.
Okay.
So they're helping truck operators access credit to buy used commercial vehicles.
So they're going beyond just connecting shippers and truckers.
Yep. They're becoming like a one-stop shop for all their financial needs.
And that financing part is really interesting. It sounds like they're really ramping it up in 2024.
Well, yeah, they've been piloting it for a while, but yeah, they're going big.
Okay, so what's so special about how they're doing the financing?
It's their tech-driven approach.
Mm-hmm.
They're using data and algorithms to assess risk and streamline the whole process.
Interesting.
It's just another example of how they're bringing modern solutions to a market that's been kind of underserved.
Yeah, okay, I get that. But let's not forget about the whole regulatory landscape in India. Is that smooth sailing for them?
Well, no road is ever completely smooth, especially with regulations. Zinka's subsidiary, Blackbuck FinServe, the one that handles the financing,
Yeah.
it falls under some pretty strict rules as an NBFC.
An NBFC. For those of us who aren't finance experts, what does that even mean?
It stands for Non-Banking Financial Company.
Oh, okay.
Basically, being an NBFC means Blackbuck FinServe is subject to a whole other layer of regulations by the Reserve Bank of India.
So, extra rules on top of the regular rules
Exactly. They have to meet these capital adequacy requirements, meaning they need a certain amount of capital in reserve.
to protect against losses.
Right, exactly. And then there are regulations on lending practices and risk management.
Sounds complicated.
It's a lot.
It is. And it's not just the financial regulations, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're dealing with a ton of sensitive data on their platform.
No, yeah, for sure. Data security and privacy are huge for them.
With the IT Act and all the data protection laws,
Absolutely.
any slip up there could be disastrous.
Totally. It could hurt their reputation and expose them to legal issues.
So they're in a pretty tightly regulated environment with a lot at stake.
Definitely.
But that doesn't mean they're not doing well, right? So let's look at their financials and see how they're actually performing.
Yes, let's do that.
I'm always eager to dig into the numbers.
Your enthusiasm is contagious. I'm getting excited to unpack this all.
Haha. Well, I love learning about companies like Zinka who are trying to do something different. And maybe we'll uncover some insights that could be really valuable for our listeners.
For sure. Okay, so looking at their revenue growth,
Mm-hmm.
Zinka's seen some impressive numbers in key areas,
That's good.
but they have incurred losses.
Losses aren't always a bad thing, though, right? Especially for a company investing heavily in growth.
Right.
What's the story behind those losses?
Well, from what we see in the prospectus, it seems their losses are mostly due to their investments in product development, sales, and marketing.
So they're in growth mode, pushing hard to expand.
Yeah, exactly. But are they spreading themselves too thin?
That's a good question. They've got the payments, the vehicle financing, the loads marketplace. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and diversification can be great, but it can also be risky if they're not managing resources well. One thing to look at is how much they rely on anyone offering.
Yeah, if one of those pillars starts to crumble.
The whole thing could become unstable.
Exactly. And we know they're already facing challenges with seasonality, especially during monsoon season. That's something they can't control, and it seems to hit their payments and loads offerings particularly hard.
It does.
And on top of that, they're also exposed to risk because they rely on a small number of key suppliers for their vehicle tracking.
Yeah.
Any disruption there, and their core services could be impacted.
Big time.
So it's a bit of a tightrope walk for them, managing these risks while also pursuing aggressive growth. We need to see what they're doing to address this.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
What's their plan for mitigating these potential disruptions?
Yeah.
How are they building a more resilient business?
That's the question. To understand that, we need to dig into their financials and see how they're managing cash flow.
Okay.
All right, let's take a quick pause. When we come back, we'll explore Zinka's cash flow situation and get a sense of their overall financial health. Don't go anywhere. This deep dive is just getting started.
All right, so let's look at their cash flow now.
Okay.
You know, a company can have a great business model.
Yeah.
Amazing growth, at least on paper.
Right.
But if their cash flow isn't healthy, that's a big problem.
It is a red flag for investors.
Huge red flag.
So are we seeing any red flags here? What's going on with Zinka's cash flow?
Well, their financial statements do show that they've had negative cash flow from operations.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, I mean,
Yeah.
but there's a little more to it.
Okay.
Their recent financials actually show some improvement
Oh, okay.
in their operating cash flow.
That's-
Yeah, and it seems to be driven partly by an increase in what's called deferred revenue
Yeah.
and changes in their working capital.
Okay, hold on. I love getting into the details.
Sure.
But for our listeners who maybe aren't financial experts, can you just quickly explain what deferred revenue and working capital mean?
Oh, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So think of deferred revenue as money they've already gotten
Okay.
for services they haven't actually provided yet.
Like a subscription you pay up front.
Exactly. Like you subscribe to something for a year.
Yeah.
You pay up front, but you haven't used all the months yet.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then working capital.
Yeah.
That's basically the difference between their assets and their liabilities.
So it's like a snapshot of their short-term financial health.
Exactly.
So if those areas are improving, that suggests they're getting better at managing their cash, which is super important for a company like Zinka that's investing so much.
It's critical for them.
Yeah, okay.
But we also have to remember
Yeah,
that they have been relying on external financing to keep things running.
right.
The prospectus mentions they've raised a lot of capital through debt and equity.
So they're not self-sufficient yet.
Not entirely, no.
So potential investors are going to want to look closely at their debt levels
For sure.
and try to figure out what their future financing needs might be.
Because if a company's too reliant on outside funding, it can be really risky.
Yeah, especially if things in the economy change
Absolutely.
and that access to capital dries up.
Right. It's a balancing act
It is.
between funding growth and staying financially healthy.
Okay, before we move on to the IPO
Yeah.
details, there's one more financial thing I think we should touch on.
What's that?
Their revenue mix.
Oh, good point.
Knowing where their revenue comes from
Yeah,
can give us a clearer picture of their business model and its potential.
for sure. So what's the breakdown?
Yeah, what's the breakdown?
Well, it looks like a big chunk of their earnings come from commission income and subscription fees.
Okay, so that tells us they're not just transactional. They're building those recurring revenue streams.
Which is usually a good sign for investors.
It is, because it means they've got some predictability and stability.
Exactly.
But it also means they really need to keep those customers happy.
It all comes back to customer retention.
Yeah, those truck operators need to keep using their services.
And that brings us back to those user engagement numbers we talked about.
Oh, yeah. Almost 40 minutes a day on the app.
That's pretty sticky.
It is encouraging.
It shows they're doing something right.
It does, but there's always two sides to every coin, right?
Of course.
What are some of the downsides or risks with their revenue model?
One thing that jumps out is that they rely heavily on payments and telematics.
Okay.
If something disrupts those two.
Their revenue could take a hit.
Exactly.
And we've already talked about the seasonality issues,
Mm.
which really seem to affect those areas the most.
Especially during monsoon season.
Right, right.
So, yeah, these are definitely factors that investors need to consider carefully. But investing is all about risk and reward.
It is.
So let's look at the details of this IPO and see what kind of opportunities it might have.
All right, sounds good to me. Let's get into the IPO specifics and see what it all means for investors. All right, welcome back. We've talked about Zinka's business model, their growth, the regulations they face, the financials.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. But now let's focus on the IPO itself
Okay.
and what it could mean for investors.
Right. Let's get into the details.
So the IPO, when is it happening?
It's supposed to open on November 16th
Okay.
and close on the 18th.
So just a couple of days?
Yep. But those dates can change, so always double check the official filings.
Always good advice. And speaking of things to double check, let's talk about the price band.
Yes, the price band.
Zinka's trying to raise a lot of capital through this IPO, and they've set the price band for their shares between, I'm just going to use placeholders here,
Okay.
between euro and euros per share.
So that price band is super important for investors.
It is.
It gives you an idea of how much the company is worth overall.
Yeah.
And helps you decide if the IPO price is good.
Makes sense.
But you can't just buy one share, you know?
Right, there's the whole lot thing.
Yeah, the lot system.
Something new investors get confused about sometimes, I think.
It can be confusing.
Can you explain how it works?
Sure. So for Zinka, the minimum you can buy is shares.
Okay.
That's the lot size.
All right.
You can't buy less than that, and any more you buy has to be in multiples of that lot.
So it could be harder for smaller investors to get in.
Yeah, especially if the share price is high.
It's something to consider, for sure.
Definitely.
And I imagine not everyone who applies will get shares, right?
Right. There's an allocation process.
To make sure it's fair.
Exactly. The prospectus outlines how they'll distribute shares among different types of investors.
Okay.
So they have certain percentages for like big institutions, individual investors, and so on.
So no one entity can just come in and take over.
Right. It's designed to prevent that.
Okay, makes sense. Now, for those who do get shares,
Yeah.
there's the lock-in period.
Ah, yes, the lock-in period.
What's that all about?
So that means certain shareholders, like the founders,
Okay.
they can't sell their shares for a set amount of time after the IPO.
How long is it usually?
It varies, but it's there to show they're committed for the long term.
Like they're in it to win it.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And it can help keep the share price stable after it starts trading.
So it's a good sign for investors, right?
It can be, yeah, shows confidence.
Okay, now what about the money they raise? What are they planning to do with it?
Good question. The use of proceeds is always important.
It is. Investors want to know.
Right, so as we mentioned earlier, they're planning to use a big chunk of the money for product development and sales and marketing.
Makes sense. They're in growth mode.
They're trying to get even bigger.
Investors will be watching to see if those investments pay off.
They definitely will.
Okay, so let's take a step back.
Okay.
We've covered so much about Zinka, their business, the challenges, the financials, the IPO.
They're doing some really innovative things.
They are. Their platform is designed to meet those specific needs of Indian truck operators.
And their growth has been impressive.
It has. They've become a leader in a market that's constantly evolving.
But we can't forget the challenges.
No, definitely not.
Profitability, those concentration risks, the regulations.
Well, important things to think about.
So what does this all mean for you? Well, you've got the information now
You do.
to make an informed decision.
This deep dive has given everyone the knowledge.
Now it's time to do your own research. Read that prospectus carefully,
Yes, and weigh the potential rewards against the risks.
because investing is all about finding opportunities that match your goals and your risk tolerance.
Exactly. Zinka is an interesting story, but you have to decide if it's right for you.
It's your portfolio, your decision.
I think what's fascinating about Zinka
Yeah,
is that their approach, this tech-driven approach, it's not just disrupting trucking.
it's bigger than that.
It is. They're modernizing a huge part of India's infrastructure,
And that could have major implications for the whole country.
potentially even for the global economy.
It's a story worth watching.
It definitely is. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Zinka Logistics Solutions Limited.
Hope you enjoyed it.
We hope you learned something, and until next time, happy investing.